Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast. Here's your host, Pete Tigers.
I'm pleased to be welcoming my guest back today to talk fishing and fishing tackle. He is an extremely talented angler with both a single-handed and a spey rod, and is UK sales agent for Guideline. We have much to talk about. Jim, it's great to have you back, bud. How you doing?
Hey buddy, I'm awesome, thank you. It's good to hear your voice again. It's been a while since we've had a chance to catch up.
Absolutely. We bumped into each other at the BFFI. I was really surprised to end up going there as a punter and really enjoyed it. And that's a fun show, isn't it?
Yeah, it was super busy as well. I didn't have a retailer there, so I just kind of went down just to kind of just to see how busy the show was, but super well attended. I thought it was packed, actually. I think I was there were you there both days? I was just there one day on the Saturday.
Same as you, yeah, on the Saturday.
It was awesome. I was really pleased. So there was a real buzz about the show. So I would guess that it will be as busy, if not even busier, this year. It's just good news when you see that much interest. It's a good time of year as well, Pete, isn't it? You know, early doors, everybody's just kind of coming out of hibernation, starting to think fishing again.
Yeah, it's a perfect time from that. That coming out of hibernation was exactly the thing I was thinking about. And it's the chance for people to catch up, to meet, have a browse about the tackle, the tyres and everything that goes with it. And I think we're lucky to have that to bump into people at as well. And how's the year been for you? Has it been a good year from a fishing perspective?
Yeah, I think, like everybody, it was challenging at times, certainly with reference to the conditions. So up here in the north of the wall from where you are, Pete, you know, in the frozen wastelands of Yorkshire, Lancashire and Cumbria, we had kind of like 16 weeks of no water on the rivers. The trout fishing stood up okay. Hatches were okay, pretty good. Got some nice trout fishing in earlier in the year. Then when I wanted the rain like we had last year, earlier in the season, for my bit that I fish on the Eden, further up the River Eden in Cumbria, we didn't get any rain, so therefore we didn't get any fish. And then when it's finally decided to rain, it just didn't stop, did it? It was just blowing out all the time. So I had some really good days. I didn't have the season on the salmon that I did last year, but then I don't think many people did. I still got got a few fish, which I was really chuffed about. I messed about doing stuff with nymph fishing for salmon in the low water, which I like doing anyway. It means I can just kind of borrow some of those techniques from Iceland and implement those. So that was cool. I did make a massive faux pas with reference to, I planned the day to go in low water. The water was super clear. The Eden clear anyway. The Emont feeds it, which is like, it's kind of almost like a chalk stream clarity. And I knew there was one particular pool that A, held fish, B, that had done very well nymphing out of the previous year at exactly the same time. And I went specifically to target pretty much that one pool with the kind of Icelandic techniques. And I got there with a pal, sat on the bank, had a cup of coffee, watched a few fish splashing about in the pool, set the rod up, and then looked down at the rod handle that was next to me and thought, oh no, what have I done? That's not a 10-foot 7-weight, and it was a 9'9" 3-weight that I'd put in the wrong tube after a show, and I was like, oh my god! So my mate was like, what are you going to do? He said, I've only got the double hander. I said, oh, well, I'll just do it with this. So I crept out into position, and it's a really cool place to fish. You'll have to fish it with us. This particular pool, you've got to get out on this bit of bedrock in low water. And then if the sun's in the right position, you can see the fish just in front of you. So I could see, I don't know, 4 or 5 fish. And I was kind of gently, super stealthy, kind of Paul Proctor trout fishing mode out into position. Got into position, And just as I was about to make a cast that was no more than 12 feet in front of me, because I crept up behind these things, I looked down and there was a salmon right under my rod tip. So I was like, oops. So I dropped the nymph on it, and I say a nymph, it's not really a nymph, it's like a little hexagonal tungsten Francis thing I used in Iceland. And yeah, I ended up having probably the best day of the season on a 3-weight, which was cool.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And I was interested to hear, because with these conditions becoming harder and harder, we've got to innovate, we've got to
Yeah.
try different ways. So, would that method, you're sort of saying that you're seeing the fish, which is a wonderful thing, and I guess you're looking for that telltale movement if you see anything. But
Yeah.
would you fish that method blind as well? And if you
Yeah.
were, what would you be doing?
Well, you can do it in a couple of different ways, and you can do it with either a double-handed rod or you can do it with a single-handed rod. It depends, obviously, on the size of the river and the size of the tungsten bomb that you invariably will be lobbing around. So in Norway last year, I was doing it on the Orkla with a 13-footer, full floating head, a tapered leader, and I was almost kind of high sticking the runs in super low water. Well, I was high sticking the runs, and in many respects, doing it with the 13-footer was quite neat because you've just got that extra length, so you've got loads of line control. Then all I'm doing is I'm just, as you would if we were nymphing, Pete, you're just keeping in touch with the line, tracking down at the same speed of the flow, making sure there's no slack in the system. And as soon as that fly stops or darts away, then you just presume it's a fish grabbed it. So that works quite nicely on the big rivers with a salmon rod. Then on the trout rod, it works in exactly the same way. And from my jungle fishing, and because again I am a heathen from the north of England, I love swinging flies, but mainly I like catching fish. So I'm quite happy. I can't believe I'm admitting this, but I'm quite happy putting some New Zealand wool or some yarn or an indicator of some description on the line and working my way up with a fly cast, a short cast, up a run where I suspect there are fish, and just watching the indicator in the same way you would do if you were nymphing up a run for trout or grayling, and that works. It can work exceptionally. It helps you right if you know where the fish are, and if you can see them, even better. But most of us don't have that opportunity. So if you know a piece of water and you know it's holding fish, especially in low water, it's definitely worth a go. I think I didn't quite catch half my fish last year. I caught over half my fish this year in low water doing it. I love it.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant way of doing it.
Yeah.
And it just adds, like you say, it just adds a different dimension to your fishing. And I think if sometimes, because we both come from a trout fishing background as well, I think that helps us with a more flexible salmon fishing approach. Whereas I think if you've only ever really fished for salmon, we get set in our ways thinking you can only cast your fly downstream, you can only mend at 45 degrees, you can only put an upstream mend in, and you can only just sit there with your hand on your hip like I'm a little teapot waiting for something to happen. And I get bored too easy, as you know, so I need to be doing things that keep me interested and trying different techniques. And the Scandinavians have taught me that with the sinking line approach as well. I've learned so much from the boys at Guideline. I mean, they are, just on different levels to anything I'll ever be able to kind of replicate with reference to the fishing techniques and stuff. So it's just keeping an open mind, mate, isn't it, a lot of the time?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating for me that you mentioned a Francis, and I've sort of checked nymph to Francis. I've even on the Devon, I sort of double nymphed a really fast one that I could see fish in and work that way. And it seems though the Francis lends itself well to that. But I
Yeah.
also, and I'm sure you've done this already, it strikes me, and I know they've done it with the salmon on the test, that having, a heavy sort of streamer, tadpole type fly, and that
Yeah.
ability to sort of jig it up and down as well. Do you play with that a little bit?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly the same thing. So, like, one of my ambassadors in the UK, Martin Smith, who does a lot of kind of urban fly fishing. Martin's got a fly called the Martin's Minnow, and that works really well doing that. And there's also a fly in the Guideline fly range. It has to be a top selling fly. I don't know. Have you come across the Kursk? Rather unfortunately
Is that
named
the
fly after.
orange head one with the black body?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of different variations. You're right. There's an orange head one with a black body. There's a chartreuse head with a black body, and then there's a Francis one in a couple of different sizes. When they want that, they will take your arm off at the shoulders. That is outrageous. The thing with it is, for me, you need to fish it with a double, that one. Some people you see fishing it with a treble. The problem with that thing is, because this is the one that's got got like a big bullet head, right? And then it's drilled in from the top, jig style, fly wise. So the line goes in from the top, then it comes out the back end. If you fish a treble on it, you just hook up on the bottom. If you fish a double and you have the double sat with the points facing up towards the surface, you can just bounce that thing along in front of things and tickle the snout ends with those big feelers, and it drives them. It can drive them absolutely nuts.
Nice. Yeah, when I saw those in a store somewhere or other, and I bought some the moment I saw them, because
Awesome. Just don't hit yourself.
No, exactly. They're quite lively on this cast. So, and I've got a Martin's Minnow which is stuck in a tree, which I still can't reach, which I stuck in a tree trying to do a similar sort of thing. So I've got that one to go get after. But it's interesting that you mentioned him, and that sort of brings us on nicely, because obviously with you working in the industry, you have your finger very, very firmly on the pulse of what's going on. And do you detect this sort of growth? I know we were talking off mic and we thought for our era, certainly it was the sort of second coming of those other not so notable species. Have you seen that big growth your end as well, and been in touch with that and aware of what people are doing, I guess because of weather, lack of fish and everything else, that they're looking at other species? You're fully aware of what's happening, and you're tapping into it, I guess.
Yeah, I think, generally speaking, in the UK and Ireland, as a section of the sport on a geographic level, we are, partly because the sport is steeped in angling tradition, which I adore and I think is fantastic. We are slow to react to other forms of fishing that are taking off on other parts of the planet. And that might mean streamer fishing where allowed. Not suggesting, Pete, we go up to Gilly's water on the test and start streamer fishing it, although give me half a chance, I probably would. But, I think we're starting to open our eyes to other forms of fishing within the species that we associate with fly fishing, trout and salmon, like the methods we've just talked about with nymphing for salmon. But you're right. I think there is definitely more people wanting to explore different species that they can catch on the fly. I think that is definitely growing. I think crucially what's been stopping it gathering pace is probably a lack of available information about, what tackle you need for specific species, but also how the hell do you go about, if let's say, for instance, you wanted to start pike fishing, which is definitely, I've had some fantastic days on the water over the last couple of winters, again with Martin Smith, who's just a wizard at this kind of thing. Like, if I was left to my own devices a few years ago, I could cobble together the kit from information I could glean from the internet. But then it's one thing doing that and then getting down to the water, reading the water from a pike fisher's perspective, and then hooking something, and then being, how do you then deal with 15, 20 pounds of writhing, toothy fish? And I think it's that uncertainty that puts a lot of people off targeting different species. But there is more information out there than there's ever been. And I think that is something that we will continue to build on from Guideline's perspective, is that kind of educational aspect. Because the carp fishing on the fly, I'm really interested in doing. I keep saying I want to spend more time doing it and do it properly. And I'm cool with that. I'm not talking about lobbing, 16 kilos of floating dog biscuits in, but although again, if you've got a contact, the idea of like stalking carp in clear water and pitching flies in front of them, and that would be awesome. Certainly the bass fishing seems, and the saltwater side of things is gathering some pace now. But again, I think it's confidence. Like all fishing, Pete, is confidence, isn't it? For our own fishing, for the species we're aware of. And I think the more information we can get out there with reference to, if you're going off the coast, what lines do we need? What kind of marks am I looking for? It's fine thinking I'm going to go and do it, and then you literally are faced with the Atlantic Ocean and think, good Lord, where do I start? But yeah, it's growing, definitely. I think people are just getting a bit more fluid with reference to the species that they target. And I'm seeing more people going abroad to, now obviously Russia's shut, I'm seeing more people doing the saltwater fishing more than ever, and then bringing that kit back with them and then going, I've got a 9'8" weight, I might as well go and try and cast or catch some things off our coastline. I mean, in Scandinavia, that coastal sea trout fishing is one of the most important segments of the market from Guideline's perspective. It's huge. I know a couple of pals who've been over and hooked up with the Guideline boys. A couple of the guys from the retailers went out there and fished out there. They had an absolute blast fishing for sea trout in that kind of shallow coastal water off the coast of Sweden. But I mean, I know there's Denmark's a really cool spot for it. All those Baltic countries, Scandinavian countries are really cool. But there is a different attitude out there. And I say, you can see it with the way the Scandinavians invariably tackle their trout fishing, the salmon fishing. They're kind of more open-minded to different forms and different tactics and techniques, but also the species they chase. I think that kind of filters, that's starting to filter across. And you're right, it's definitely gathering pace.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And it's interesting to me that you talk about coastal sea trout, because yesterday I'm just back from Denmark and spent 3 days doing that. And
how was it?
It was tough, I've got to be honest, only because there'd been a hell of a lot of wind that had swirled round. And so it kept changing direction. It coloured up the sea. And so that was coloured up. And, we tried a couple of places on the days in the afternoon, and you couldn't see a fly, and there's the trout fisherman in me again, that, right, I'll go a bit brighter, a bit bigger, let's see what happens and go from there. We fished a fjord on the Sunday, but I think it was also that the temperatures had just dropped quite dramatically as well. And we all know that fish prefer stable conditions or constant conditions. So I think I was just probably next week, as is always the case, would have been really good. We caught fish, Rahab one, which was great. And I love, like you say, the vast expanse that, we were fishing where I was saying where the water was coloured up. We were looking at Sweden. And that's the other side. Yeah, and it's like that. And that's the thing that I love about it. And often we talk about, the scene in Scandinavia, which to me at least, and what you've said about the Guideline team as well, and from conversations I've had, seems more akin to the US style of fishing, less so than the UK. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that's always been the case. I think if you look at from a purely sales perspective, you can see it, and I think that plays into the same point. You can see trends appearing and get cemented in Scandinavia with reference to lines or shooting heads or actions of rods or that type of thing. And you can see there is a kind of delay before they gather momentum in the UK. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The one is, like we're saying, there is so much historic background, and angling is steeped in history in the UK and Ireland, and I think people are reluctant at times to break from that. Also, the average age of your Scandinavian angler is probably younger, arguably more agile, fitter, just generally, and they just, as a result, they're more willing to walk into places. I mean, I'm sure you covered quite a bit of ground when you were out in Denmark on certain days, and that plays a part as well. But listen, just as a nation, sometimes we are a bit reluctant to kind of absorb ideas from other parts of the world, but invariably we do, and we fine tune them and we make a good fist of it. But it's definitely coming, it's definitely happening, and it's exciting. I just think that we need more access, which is something we're talking about at the moment. People need more access to that information, so they've got the confidence, Pete, to decide that they're going to pick a spot on the coast or on the local river lower down to fish for pike, and they're going to be able not to just be staggering about aimlessly, feeling like they're wasting the time. Because, the fishing time for all of us, just free time in general, is so precious that it's a bit like that you don't kind of want to waste it experimenting sometimes, as much as that's where the growth and that's where the fun is. I think it's one of the reasons, just to dial it back to the salmon fishing, and why people don't try other methods when they're out on the salmon river, because they maybe waited 6 months to get on the water. They've got a week, 3 days booked in Scotland or on the local river, and they feel like they're wasting the time and not maximising the time by breaking away from what they've been doing for the last 20 years, even though it's not working.
Yeah, they're valid points, and also that we've got fewer fish to go at, so you've got to try and innovate things a little. And it fascinated me what you said about Scandinavia as well, and younger people, more people doing it. Do you think that's a function that the water is, in all intents and purposes, and certainly from a coastal point of view, free, that it makes it nice and easy and accessible?
It does. It absolutely does, and I think on the flip side of that's one of the reasons why we don't have huge numbers of people coming into fly fishing, because it isn't at times that accessible, because it is price prohibitive in many places and many areas, and also I think your point there, thinking out loud about what you're saying about the coastal fishing and how accessible that is. So are many of the lower sections of certainly my trout rivers in and around Yorkshire and Lancashire and Cumbria. You get onto the cheap seats further down the water, down these rivers, away from these prime expensive trout beats, and not only will you have access from a financial perspective to be able to get on these waters, but that's where a lot of these other species live. And to be honest with you, even from a trout perspective, it's where most of the big trout are hanging out. The areas where there are a lot more coarse fish, where there are more bait fish, protein-packed food sources produce big predatory fish, whether they're trout, salmon, perch. So yeah, it's certainly an interesting. It's certainly interesting to watch. It's definitely gathering pace. Even on the big reservoirs, right? You get out. Again, to go back to Martin and his predator fishing, he spends time down on Rutland and places like that on the big reservoirs that historically you'd always thought of as just being primarily trout fisheries, which you might have a bycatch of a pike who took your size 12 buzzer by accident and frighten the living God out of you. But he goes down there and fishes for zander and perch and pike, and so it's coming, mate. It's definitely coming. It's exciting to see.
Yeah, absolutely, and innovation. And one of the things I often say about salmon fishing is that I love the history about salmon fishing, but I also hate the history of salmon fishing, because we do need to sort of innovate, don't we? And look at different ways to approach them, and hopefully people listening who haven't nymph fished for salmon might give it a go as well, and think,
100%.
right, yeah, I need to try something a little bit different. The river's low. I wouldn't normally fish. Let's give it a go. So, if you've got a Francis or whatever it may be sitting in a fly box somewhere, give it a go and check it up the river. And like I say, you can even try a dropper on that. Is frightening stuff, too heavy stuff in a single-handed rod. My life has flashed in front of me a few times as those come flying over the top. But there we go. But I wanted to move on to tackle, and I, as listeners would know, I always like to be transparent, and I should say that I invited Jim on here because I wanted to hear about what was happening in the tackle industry, and also wanted to hear about what he's got coming for the new year, because it's a really important time for the tackle industry. As we come into, they're always looking ahead and they're thinking about the start of the next season. And I wanted to get a sense of what he has got coming that we can look forward to. And I got a chance to spend some time with Paul Richardson, who I know has been working with Guideline. And if listeners get the chance to listen to the podcast I did with him, I would really recommend it, because the guy is extraordinary. And I've called him the Jonathan Ives of fly fishing because of his innovation and design. And I saw some of the stuff that he's done for you there, which got my little cogs turning over. And so, and I liked the ethos of the company. So I wondered if we could start off with that. Yes, I know you got some really interesting stuff that we're going to learn about, and it's a lovely time of year to hear about that as well. But we're getting a sense of Guideline's ethos. But what is it when it comes to fish and fishing? And I guess also with the latest line, certainly the reels that I saw, the environment as well. So, they do have a very strong commitment to that, don't they?
Yeah, it started a few years ago with certainly in my involvement with Guideline, which is just coming up 9 years now doing this job. I can't believe how quickly that time's gone. The always and forever, certainly since my involvement, that the company unquestionably felt it had, quite rightly, a responsibility if we were making a living and we were in an industry which involved people enjoying and going out into Mother Nature, that Guideline did everything they possibly could to ensure that the products we were producing that would be used in that environment were increasingly sustainably sourced where that is humanly possible. And it started with the Elevation range of rods, which is a fantastic range of rods that we've still got in the range, where for the first time we looked at every aspect of manufacture and where we could remove harmful chemicals or harmful resins or reduce our impact in the construction of that particular product, then we did so. So, listen, it's very easy to think that from a purely sales perspective, which is what my job is, that if you jump on this green bandwagon, then you will generate some goodwill in inverted commas. I have to say, hand on heart, that Guideline from the start have made a serious commitment to this, over and above making pure profit. Of that, there is no doubt. All the products we've got, we could have sourced and not given a damn about our commitment, which is written down in the ethos of our on our company profile. And they've made a really good go at it, Pete. And it's important, and I think it's kind of following on. And I guess Patagonia, from an outdoor perspective, have been doing the same thing. it costs more money to make it, ensuring that the product you are producing isn't in any way being compromised by your ethos, your kind of green ethos, if that makes sense. But the elevation rods certainly saw the first start, our first kind of line in the sand. We've done as much as we can behind the scenes with reference to our clothing, being Blue Signed approved. We've looked at, as many companies now have, we're not alone in doing away with the plastic that our fly lines were wrapped around, as handy as they were to stick a pencil through and spool your reel up. We have a cardboard alternative, a recycled cardboard alternative in that. And then, as he quite rightly said, with Paul's introduction with his first product, really taps into that green ethos again, and that's the Nova series of reels. And like you were saying, I've been aware of Paul and his work in the industry. And if you work in the industry as we do, Pete, who hasn't, because the guy's got a fantastic reputation from a design perspective. This year has seen in Teams meetings and online and chatting to him on the phone, seeing my first kind of face-to-face involvement with him. And you're absolutely right. There's no question the guy is hugely, hugely impressive. And he's a super keen fisherman on top of his undoubted talents when it comes to tackle design. And I can't wait to see what he's going to do working with us in the future with reference to future projects. His first one is this range of reels called the Nova. And the Nova replaces the Favo reel that I'm sure some of your listeners will be familiar with. The Favo was our entry-level reel that has been in the range for a number of years, as all Guideline products generally are in the range for a number of years. We don't make wholesale changes to ranges until we've got some better technology or a better design to bring and replace it with. And I think Paul's done fantastic work with this Nova reel, which is the world's first recycled aluminium fly reel. So it's that continuation of our clean all the way ethos. And have you seen this? You've seen this reel, right?
Yeah,
seen
absolutely.
it in the flesh. Yeah. Well, my retailers have all now seen it for pretty much now for the first time. So this will be available from, all being well, the early part of 2024. It doesn't look like there's any issues with that. We do the reel in 3 sizes, in a 4/6, a 7/9, and an 8/10. And then to give you listeners an idea of the price, the 4/6 one starts at $149.99. It looks and feels, as anything that Paul does, way more expensive than the price point alludes to, as I'm sure you'll agree. And we're also doing it, Pete, in a cassette version, which is something we've been desperate for. And I think he's done a fantastic job with the cassette reel. The cassette 6/8 there's one cassette mounted on the 6/8 cage. And then there's 2 extra cassettes delivered in your pouch. So there's 3 cassettes in total. And that retails at $239.99, and both the Nova in the 3 sizes and the cassette reel are available in black. I think Paul's called it Stardust. It's kind of a silvery stardust colour. So it looks stunning. The cassette reel is really neat because he's got what we call this one-touch system, which for the competition anglers, and from reels of old, Pete, when you are faced with needing to carry a range of different fly lines of sinking densities, if you're still water fishing, or not just still water fishing, but if you've got sea trout fishing and you've got your midge tip line and your floater and your faster sinker for later in the morning, and you want to flip that spool over, that if you're buying spools, it can be considerably expensive. But if you've got a cassette system, which is easy to manage, and it is with this one-touch system, there's literally a little tab that you'll have seen on the inside of the cassette that you just lightly push, it just pops off. You pop the next one back on. There's a locator, so everything just drops into place. You don't have to kind of keep spinning the cassette round trying to find where it's supposed to drop into place. It's a really neat and clever, super simple system. So I think that's going to go down exceptionally well. But yeah, I mean, listen, I say it just made from polymer, recycled, single-use plastic. It ticks all the boxes from Guideline's perspective. Low impact with this environmentally, with recycled raw materials, and Paul's unique design when it comes to how this thing looks and performs. It's worth noting that the Nova Reel, each one, Paul, has developed its own its own drag system or its drag capabilities. I think the 4.6, has got a 2.2 kilo drag, and then the 7.9 you're stepping up again, and the 8.10, which has been in use and tested on some angry salmon in Scandinavia this season just gone. So yeah, it's a fantastic looking piece of kit. I'm really, really pleased. And so I can't wait to see what he's doing next, because if this is what he can do for like £149 starting retail, then we know with Paul the sky's the limit once we give him some more leeway to flex his design muscles.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. Stunning piece of kit. And it fascinated me what you said about, because the temptation, I guess, for a business is to continually look to bring a range. And it's nice to hear that you actually run with something for quite some time rather than, because I always think the question I would probably ask you is, right, okay, you've brought out, let's say, a new range of rods, and we'll come on to that in a second. But the temptation would be, right, that's out, let's start work on the next. But I guess it's very, very fluid from that point of view then, is it? And you're thinking, right, how can we take that? Obviously, the green angle's coming into it, but also what's moved in resins, because it seems certainly with rods, lighter, slightly deeper loading than we'd historically seen over the last 20 years, but you're happy to run with what you've got and then start to innovate, think, right, actually, there might be something that fits. That's the sense I'm getting, at least?
Yeah, there's certainly, there's a number of factors to take into consideration. And I know from Guideline's perspective, as you absolutely quite rightly and very well explained, Guideline won't move a product on unless there is a significant change in the technology and an uplift in the technology, which will enable a rod range, a range of reels, a new design in fly line, a new wader design, another jacket design, some new boots dropping on. Unless there is something that justifies the release of a new range, then it doesn't happen. That's also important from a retailer's perspective, because that means they know when they put our products into a range or into their shop and on their shelves and on their displays, that we're not going to turn around in 18 months' time after just having launched a series of rods and go, it's the whatever 3.140 or something. And then also that's important from a consumer's perspective. Listen, I'm still in the market of buying. I still have to buy my samples, unfortunately. It's just the world we live in. And, I don't want to be buying products and then go, I thought I had the new thing, and I only got it 6 months ago. Now, obviously, everything's got a shelf life, and a lot of that is dictated with reference sales. Obviously, you have to take that into consideration because we are a business. But the feedback I've always had from my retailers, and the word I've always had from the office, from the designers, from Life, and now Tellis has come on board. Is a spectacular new guy we've got with the great work that Paul's doing, is that it has to be the right product at the right time, and you don't shift a product on just because you want to throw another product down the pipe. Is probably as blunt as I could say it.
Nice, because
And
I
I
guess
think
it
that's
could.
important.
Yeah, because it could be easy to, in effect, rebadge something, couldn't it? And I
Ah,
like that
beyond
story.
easy.
Yeah, so I kind of like it from that point of view. And while we're talking about rods, then have you got anything new coming along on that front?
Yeah, so last year we introduced the NT11 range of salmon rods to replace the hugely successful NT8, another one that sat in the range for a good number of years, although time flies by. The NT11 last year was just phenomenally expensive as our flagship double hander. And into that, we have got a range of 6-piece switch rods, the NT11 switch. 6-piece because we know that these rods will be ending up in the lucky people's hands who are throwing them into a bag and heading down to Argentina, to go to Iceland. It's a nice little range of 3 models in the range. The switch rods are, say, 6-piece, 11'6" in length. We're doing them in a 6'7", a 7'8", and an 8'9". And unlike going back now, but unlike the LPXE switch rods, I don't know if you ever saw those, they had the little pop-out bottom handle. Historically, Guideline's switch rods were rated for trout lines. For a while now, certainly I think probably 4 or 5 years now, our switch rods, like everybody else's switch rods on the market pretty much are, these are double-handed line ratings, which is important to note. So that's in a 6'7", a 7'8", and an 8'9". I did manage to get my clammy northern paws on the 7'8" in August, and I put a proper bend in it. I fell in love with it so much that even when I was fishing bigger waters and bigger rivers, I was still getting this, because you are running off those double-handed line sizes now. So with the short heads, man, it works absolutely beautifully. And then to go along with those, Pete, we have got an integrated line, the Scandi integrated, which we've done down to a 6'7" line rated. So this is the short-headed but integrated, so no loop-to-loop connections. It's a straight floater. You can bolt a poly leader on it. You can tie a tapered leader on it. You can strut your own tapered leader for it. So it's a straight floater, so perfect for the switch rods and perfect for a lot of the summer salmon fishing we do on all our salmon rivers. And we're doing that, say, from a 6'7" all the way through to a 10'11". And to give you an idea how these would work perfectly on the switch rods, like the 6'7", which would integrated line, which would sit on our 6'7" NT11 6-piece switch rod, that's 32 feet in length. And then, to give you a comparison, the 910 integrated is 39 feet. And the 1011 being 41 feet in length. So that just drops onto that existing range of salmon rods we do anyway, and those switch rods as well. For the trout fishers, we've made a couple of additions to the elevation range. They still think that 9'4" elevation is an absolute flipping phenomenal rod for the money. It's just so good. The range is solid across the board, but the 9'4" and the 13', mate, in the salmon rod, struggled not to pick that up from my armory of Guideline weaponry. It's a bit like John Wick at times when I leave my rod room sometimes. I don't know what to pick up next. But that 13-footer. So we've added a couple of trout rods into the range for the smaller rods. So we've added a 7'2" for a 3 in the elevation range. We're calling these the brook rods. There's like subcategory, elevation brook. 7'2" for a 3 and a 3-piece. And then 8 foot for a 4 3-piece. And again, we've made sure we've got lines to sit on these smaller rods. We've got the brook line. So we didn't want to produce a range of rods from Guideline and then people go, oh, it's fantastic. And where do we get a line from? So we've done a short-headed, super quick to load up range of lines for bolting onto those short rods where you're going to be super restricted backcasting room and under basically your world a lot of the time in those kind of super overgrown rivers that you've got down there. So, and I've played about with, I managed to get hold of the sample off Life Desk, which was super lucky, in the 4-weight Brookline. And it's, I think we're doing that from a 5 up to a 5 as well. It's such a good line. I think I'll probably load it on I might even load it on a 5-weight. It's a short. I mean, it's designed for fishing short range, turning leaders over quickly, still turns over and presents nicely. I think it'd be really cool for that duo dry dropper method. On a windy day when you're turning over those big wind-resistant dry flies and stuff. Everything's like 2 rod lengths out, 3 rod lengths out from your feet. I think it's going to be a neat line for that. So that's really cool. I tell you what, we have got that the dealers have really loved this ULS range of rods, which I'll definitely find a home for. We had a range called the ULS previously. That's been superseded after a number of years by the imaginatively titled ULS 2.0. But what the ULS is, I guess if you came from the other side of the pond, you might throw the term trout spay over it or something like that. It's a range of rods which can be like the original LPXE that Life became so well known for. You can use it single-handed, or you can, because it's got a proper little bottom hand on it, you can wield it like a short double-hander. But to carry trout lines or trout line ratings on them anyway, that would be a better way of describing it. So we do that from a 10'6" for a 5, a 10'6" for a 6, and then which would be perfect for you kind of Martin doing his streamer fishing, that type of deal. Out of a boat also, where you kind of want to lift and dibble flies across the water. But the 2 standout ones for me, and the one again I managed to rob from my boss when he was over, was the 11'7" weight and the 11'8" weight. I haven't chucked the 8 weight yet. The 11'7" weight is a flipping laser guided thing of fish destruction. That is so much fun to chuck. Because it's more accurate for those who've got the original ULS. It's a little bit more precise. It's a little bit quicker in recovery. It's more accurate. I think the finish looks awesome on it as well. But that, Pete, either with our ULS multi-tip fly line, or I was running one of our Guideline bullets on it, which again is a short head, like, I don't know, it's the bullets in a 25 feet, something, 24, 25 feet. So loads up quick. You can spay cast it beautifully. If you've got high banks behind you and fringes that, if you see trout fishing at night, it allows you to wield it single-handed and elevate it over the top of high bankings. It's just it's one of those rods that once you've cast it, mate, you just got a massive smile on your face. And you're like, your brain's going, oh yeah, I could use that here, and I've got a pull for this, and oh yeah, when I get to that bit, this is the rod I'm gonna have out. So that's fun. That's fun. And then one thing that kind of slid in last year, midway through the year, but sold out so quickly, was actually so Tellis, who is our head of product design now, who last year was his first official year, but he was working as Life Stavmo's official understudy and sort of sorcerer's apprentice for a couple of years. Tellis introduced a kind of little 3-rod range in that NT11 lineup of our flagship salmon rods called the Fast Full Flex. And we did a small run of them. They're in a 13-foot 8.9, a 14-foot 9.10, and a 15-foot 10.11. Tellis coming from you'd really love these rods, mate, and we should maybe chat to Tellis at some point, because he's kind of made of the same stuff from casting background that we kind of came through in our earlier years. And from his competition casting side of things, he loves, and from his fishing perspective, which is phenomenal at doing both, he loves rods that flex deeply and recover quickly. Now, I would argue that Guideline rods have always done that more than our competitors. And one of the things I've loved about Guideline's products is that you do get this huge level of feel and connection through the cast when you're wielding either a trout rod or a salmon rod or the saltwater rods. You do get that lovely feeling like you're forcing that rod into a bend and it's tightening and it's going to come and help you on the way forward when you've made the stop. And the Fast Full Flex is a combination of that married with Tellis's undoubted expertise from a distance casting perspective. So this is an action which bends deeper, as the name suggests, and also, as the name suggests, recovers quicker than the NT11 rods. It's kind of like stepping back in time a little bit with reference to getting that lovely deep load, but because of the resins we were able to use and this NT11 technology, man, once that rod decides it's recovering, it flipping comes back at an absolute astronomical rate. So you feel like you're not doing anything to set up a D-loop. You just feel like you're moving the rod, because the rod bends and then it just tosses that D-loop on behind you. And then we just kind of stop it on the way forward without giving it that classic Scandinavian bottom hand thwack into your midsection. My good Lord, this thing throws an absolute million miles. And I say it kind of drifted in halfway through the season, but sold out and got sold out ridiculously quickly. It got a real following, and it's the one when I was doing Andrew Ryan's show over at Clonanav a few weeks ago. It's like where it's the kind of consumer's first chance to get their hands on the new Guideline products. I had a couple of those, and all the super experienced salmon boys were all over those. It just basically froze to death before I could get them to put them down and go and have some warm Irish stew somewhere.
Lovely. Well, that's a lovely range of stuff that we've heard about so far. What else, before we move on, what else do you want to mention out of the range? Is there things like, I noticed you had an interesting innovation with nets, waders, things like that. Have you got anything new on that front you want to tell us about?
Well, one of the big hitters for us last year, one of the big successes from purely a sales perspective, and this was our Wake Forward lines, actually. So Guideline's Wake Forward line range, which have historically been super successful in Scandinavia and, like, I guess, the trout side of Guideline business in the UK, has been growing slowly but surely. The trout lines that we're producing now are, I think, bangs for your bucks wise, absolutely outrageously good. There's two lines that I use. I mentioned the Brook line, which is the new one onto the market. We do one called a CDC, which, as the name suggests, is a fantastic dry fly line that holds up super well in the air and is super accurate. And then the Presentation Plus, for me, is the best all-round fly line. loads up quicker, shorter head than the CDC line, super stable, super accurate. I can turn over monster leaders with it. And because it's got that shorter head length, it's just a lot of the trout fishing we all do, right? And one of the reasons the Guideline trout rods I love so much summer trout fishing is that I don't want a 4-weight, a 5-weight that needs 30 feet of line out before I'm starting to force a bend in it on the basis that most of the fish I'm catching are 2 or 3 rod lengths away from my feet. So I want a rod and a line combination that loads up super quickly and super accurately, but still gives me the ability to kind of throw long if I want to. So the fly lines have been hugely successful. We've got a range of, again, sliding into that elevation range along and snuggling up alongside those 2 shorter brook rods. We've got elevation nymph, which is coming in a 10-foot for a 2, a 10.6 for a 3, and a 10-foot 2 for a 4, starting at £280. So they are a shorter nymph rod that you would also be able, especially at 10-foot peak, you definitely be able to do some dry dropper, and if needs must, and you suddenly find yourself surrounded with rising fish, whip the leader off and put a wee dry fly on. So they slide into the range. They've been, as most of the kit, or you mentioned earlier, just sorry to get sidetracked, but how much time does our stuff spend being tested and used? Who's testing it? Who's using it? Who's giving the feedback? How much of that feedback is being listened to and utilized? Well, I can only talk from Guideline's perspective. It's exhaustive, which I think is hugely, hugely important. And I think is one of the main reasons why the company continues to go from strength to strength, is that not the whole ethos of it doesn't matter with Guideline. It's the weirdest company to work with in a best possible way, because it doesn't matter whether you're talking to the people in accounts from my perspective. It doesn't matter if having a conversation with somebody about a delivery from the Guideline warehouse where the deliveries are being packed. It doesn't matter if it's the guys who work in the returns department in Sweden, or it's you sat in a meeting and there's some board members there, and it's everybody fishes, Pete. Everybody fishes, and everybody fishes to a scarily high level, to the point where when you're out at a sales meeting and somebody goes, just going to have a cast with that, it's a bit like doing an AAPLA exam back in the day. You're like, oh God, I'm going to mess this shot up. So, and I think that feeds back into the level of the products, and it's so dialed deep into the DNA, just this love of fishing. So what that means is, from like a product testing perspective, is that samples, depending on the item, but let's potentially say, Rod, that Telus and Life obviously have spectacular, I would argue, unrivaled knowledge with reference to the materials, how they want the rod to behave, and their just sheer volume of experience designing rods over a large number of years. And then we will always get, for us, because obviously specific markets are slightly different. What I want for my market and what I want for my end consumers might be slightly different than, for argument's sake, let's say like the Danish sea trout fishing market, where you're fishing those small, narrow rivers with high fringes. What I consider to be a short-headed fly line, that my counterpart, Brian, would go, oh my God, that's like a long-bellied spey line. So that's so products will be we will be asked for our opinion often, and we take the fine-tuning of products exceptionally seriously. And if a range, to the point from a sales perspective, sometimes I'm like, I need it. Like, Mark, we need it now. We need it. And the guys will go, no. It's like there's a rod in here that we're not like 100% happy with. They want the range all bending and curving. and recover in the same way, as close as they can possibly do it. And I love that, Pete. I love that attention to detail, and that passion to do that properly is super important. And that feeds back into the products for sure. For sure.
Absolutely. And the fascinating thing from that is, I guess, that because you're not rushing product to market, then there is plenty of time to test it and go from there. And I've used things in the past and I'm thinking it's more clothing stuff. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
wow, they clearly didn't ask anyone, or they rushed it to market as the line gets tangled around the jacket or whatever it may be, and you think it's been rushed a little bit too much. So that's really pleasing to hear. I was going to ask you about, working in this industry for such a long time, and is that difficult? But it's abundantly clear. I don't need to ask you that question because you're thoroughly enjoying your role. You're enjoying working with the company as well, which is really pleasing to hear. So I wish you all the very best with the launches for the new year. And it's really important to me that we support the tackle industry and the people behind it. And it's lovely that listeners can get the opportunity to hear from you, that you're a passionate angler, you're understanding what the product's used for, and of course the people who are designing it and using it. So we're getting a nice inside look into Guideline and the process, which is very pleasing to hear as well, and the way that they go about doing things that I really, really like. And that's wonderful to hear. I know last time we talked that you talked about going off grid. Does that mean you're heading off grid to fish somewhere soon?
I'm always going off grid to fish somewhere soon, Pete. You know that. I love my adventures. So yeah, I won't be going until next year. I came back from the jungle in August, end of August, I think it was. Just so much happened since then. Yeah, end of August, beginning of September, I was out again in the Amazon for my fourth trip. And I really struggle talking about it, only because I've been so fortunate where I fished around the world. I fished arguably at the finest lodges at the finest times of year. I'm not quite sure how that's worked out. But the fishing in the Amazon is indescribable. Like, you're better educated than me, Pete. You'd be able to put it into words. I'm a comprehensive, educated northerner. It blows my mind that the Amazon, the quality of the fishing, the beauty of the ecosystem. If you wield a single-handed rod and you have the means to go destination fishing, and you want an adventure that you will never, ever, ever forget, other than the fact that more crazy things happen and exciting things happen on an hourly basis that your brain can compute and remember, then that for me. So the destination fishing is, I'll always try and get off the grid because I think it keeps me fresh. And then, I'm absolutely, completely and utterly obsessed with my Ironman triathlon. So I'm back in training again now for another bigger, harder, tougher challenge next year. That's become super important as well. So yeah, I'm busy.
Nice. And I'm thrilled because I'm a comprehensive school guy as well. So I'm thrilled that you thought I was something else as well. My maths teacher apparently said to somebody that I would grow up to be a delinquent. They're exactly right as well. So they called that one perfectly.
I got that wrong. Yeah. Well, good for you. Good for us both then.
Let's wind this up because we've talked over an hour now. We've been doing this Fly Culture soundtrack, and each episode now of the podcast, I ask somebody to give me a song that I can add to the soundtrack. What is your choice going to be?
Oh my good Lord, how can you possibly... You don't want my soundtracks. I listen to 80s hardcore flipping rave. What would I... I've got to pick something. Can it be something random?
Yeah, whatever you like.
I don't know how hardcore I don't want to frighten your listeners. They may never buy another Guideline product again if I expose my dreadful taste in music. This could go horribly wrong right at the very end. Okay, I'm just going to go for it, Pete.
Go on.
I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to go Rage Against the Machine.
Yep.
I'm going to go Bulls on Parade.
Bulls on Parade. Lovely.
And I'm going to go and hide.
Yeah, I will load that one up. I'll have a listen to it first as well, and then go from there. Jim, as always, it's a pleasure to catch up with you. And like I say, it's been wonderful to get a sense of Guideline. And I'll reiterate again that Jim's not asked to come on here and talk about this. I was fascinated to know. I've been using the rods a little bit as well, which I like very much. And so it's lovely to hear from the people that when you walk into a fly shop, this is the person who's chosen those rods to go in there, and that's really, really important to me, so that you get a sense that they feel just like we do about fly fishing. Jim, can you tell us your contact details? Where can people find you? Where can they get info and that sort of stuff?
You can, most of my contact details, well, all my contact details will be on the Guideline website, as all our contact details are all the different agents and reps are. That's guidelineflyfish.com. You can reach out to me on social media, on Instagram and Facebook if needs be. That's Guideline Fly Fisher, as opposed to Guideline Fly Fish, which is slightly confusing. But if you just tap Jim Curry and I'll pop up.
Nice. Fantastic, bud. It's been brilliant to catch up as always.
Thanks, Pete. It's great to speak to you, mate. And thanks to you as well for all you do with, the magazine and the podcast and everything. It's all part of this, of spreading the passion and the love we've got for this. So, great work from your perspective, mate.
Nice one. Thanks, buddy. Jim, it's been great to catch up. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast. Well, everyone, this has been another episode of the podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I thought I'd try something a little bit different, and we'll talk about some tackle, which I can talk about. I think we could have probably talked on for many hours from there as well, but it's been really wonderful to hear a little bit about Jim and Guideline and what they're actually doing. So I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. As ever, these are always free to download, so there'll never be any charge for them, and I hope you continue to enjoy them very, very soon. But thanks so much for listening.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.